Good morning and welcome. This is 10 years hence. Our guest speaker comes to us this morning from San Francisco. Fred Dust is a partner and practice lead for IDEO, the global design and innovation firm in California. At IDEO, Fred leads Systems at Scale, the group responsible for helping clients with large systemic infrastructural questions from governmental shifts to behavioral change and beyond. During his tenure at IDEO, Fred has helped guide the realization of a future-focused education center at Stanford, has taken Nike executive shopping, and worked with patients and staff to help build innovative service models for the Mayo Clinic and Kaiser Permanente. Most recently, he helped the American Red Cross redesign the donation experience and the Transportation Security Administration evolve airport security. Mr. Dust is a member of the Board of Governors at Parsons, the New School, and also acts on the advisory board of the Aspen Institute. He has taught classes at California College of the Arts and at the School of Environmental Design at the University of California at Berkeley, as well as holding numerous guest professorships, including the Bruce Goff Lectureship at the University of Oklahoma. Fred Dust holds a bachelor's degree in art history from Reed College and a Master of Architecture from the School of Environmental Design at the University of California, Berkeley. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, please help me welcome Fred Dust.
Thanks very much. So if I start wandering around on this stage and bumping into walls, I have to admit I didn't sleep very well last night. And I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, having had a dream that I was late for class. And it's one of those things where you're sitting and you're saying, oh, it's one of those stupid anxiety dreams. And then I was like, oh, wait, that's a real dream. This is really happening. I could be late for class, so then I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. Today we're going to talk about design, we're going to talk about social impact, and we're going to talk about business. And one thing I want to be really clear on as we start, which is that one thing we are not going to talk about is whether business can have social impact, whether it's possible to kind of focus business practices towards the betterment of people. I don't believe that's an if question. I think it's a must. I think it is happening. And I actually think that you are the future of this question. So we're not going to debate that. It's not the topic that we want to talk about. What we're going to talk about is how business can have social impact. What are the methods that we actually think are going to allow for really instrumental change to happen through the mechanism of business and capitalism? That's the message that we're talking about today. First, though, let me give you a little background on IDEO. If anyone knows us, they know us for probably these kinds of things. The first mouse that was designed for Microsoft, toothbrushes, toothpaste tubes that you actually have, banking services that you actually use. I would just say that just looking at the worlds of product, services, healthcare, the places that we've had impact most traditionally, it's fairly unlikely that any of you reached today 10 o'clock this morning, 11 o'clock this morning, without having run across something that we've designed in your life. We have worked on thousands and thousands and thousands of design projects across multiple industries and multiple kinds of arenas. Most recently, our work has kind of ranged pretty broadly to education. Everything from how spaces are built in schools to how curriculums are built in schools, which we'll talk about a little bit later. You mentioned TSA. We've spent almost 3 years working very slowly with trying to figure out how to make TSOs design thinkers. It's an interesting training project around how to kind of change their mindset about the work that they do. And most recently, it's just one of my favorite projects, is working with CDC to think about childhood obesity and how we actually can help sort of solve that. The way I think about it, it's the really simple question that's actually the hardest. How do you get kids to eat their vegetables? Seems easy, really hard. So I want to stop for a second and talk about IDEO. Why? So why do people come to us with these questions? Why do we seem like the right place to kind of end up if you have these kinds of queries? Late. No. Wow, it's like half the school is late. Come on in. So first, The first thing that I think is actually really key in the reasons why people come to us is that we are a people company. We are human-centered. The primary piece of what we do when we go out in the field is about human centering. It's looking at real people and understanding what they do and what they need. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about, I would say a good third of what I'm going to talk about this morning, is what that means and why that matters. Second, we're a change company. People don't come to us when they know what they want. We actually worked with Memorial here in South Bend. They didn't come to us saying, design us this blank, the thing that we always have. They said, we want to question the future of heart center activity and actually how healthcare is delivered. When people come to us, they want to think about the future of things. Our process is discovery-based. We're based on understanding what something can be, not what something is right now. And then lastly, we're an impact company. It's all about getting things into the market one way or another. We actually believe having things out there in the world is one of the most important litmuses of success. That's the way we judge ourselves, and that's the way we focus, and that's actually why clients come to us. But we do it all through the process of design and design methodology. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is how we're using design methodologies with clients to think about kind of social change. One thing that I will say that's actually core to thinking about design and why it actually matters, especially in the world of social impact, is that design is a fundamentally optimistic activity. You can't do it if you don't believe that there's some possibility of changing the world, because by nature, you're going to put something out in the world. So if you're going into it with this kind of sense of cynicism, you're actually not going to be able to have the impact you want. So it's one thing that I think we actually bring, and I think we all should bring as we go forward into the work that we actually do ourselves. So with that, I thought what I would do is spend the majority of this time and I definitely won't go, it's an hour and a half. I definitely won't go that long. It'll be much, much shorter because I really would like to kind of open this up for dialogue and discussion. To talk about 4 thoughts we have on design and social change, how we can actually think about design helps business helping people, basically. One note on the things I'm going to share, they're not all going to be things around social impact. Most of them are not going to be IDEO stories. What I've actually tried to do is go out in the world and look at the ways that I think design methodologies have been applied, but not by designers. And I think the reason I want to do that, especially for this audience, is that I don't want anyone to walk away today saying, great, if you're a design consultancy in California, you can do that. You can do it. People are doing it all the time. And so the point is, I want to use examples from the real world. So the first principle or rule that we believe, and this is going to come up a lot, obviously, is human centering, putting people first in the activity. For those of you who do know a little bit about IDEO, as a design thinking organization, we believe that the primary lens into any problem is people. Understanding people will give you insight into what you should do. And then there's how do you make it happen? Is it technically feasible? All those things are really powerful and important, but understanding people is actually the kind of core first question that we ask. Just a quick example, we showed the Bank of America Keep the Change project before, and I used this morning to explain it on a podcast I did for the school here. But interesting story around actually how Bank of America Keep the Change came about. It came about because we sent anthropologists, psychologists, about a third of our company are cognitive scientists, anthropologists, psychologists, sociologists, into the field with Bank of America to understand people and the way they actually thought about money, and primarily focused on women and money. And what was interesting is that we didn't go out and ask them about banking. We didn't ask them about banking services. We didn't ask them to think about banks because they don't like banks and they don't want to talk about banks. What we did is we spent time in the field watching them, talking to them about money. This is a thing that we do called a wine and dine, where we get people really drunk and ask them questions. And it's a phenomenal methodology, and it's actually really easy. Especially if you're a student, it's really easy to do. We actually do use it on campus, but not quite the same way. What was really interesting is we started to see really interesting behaviors through things like wine and dines or just shopping along with people. And one of my favorite stories is we were out in the field with a woman who had a large purse, and in that purse, a large Ziploc bag. And every time she would pay for something in cash, she would take the change from that cash exchange and drop it into a plastic bag in her purse. And at some point, we said, wait, what are you doing? That looks really heavy. And she said, oh, well, I'm keeping the change. What I do is I take this money and I put it into an account for my son's education at the end of the week. So not surprisingly, that's where the notion of keep the change came from. It was an existing behavior that we saw somebody doing, and we were able to translate immediately into one of the most successful banking products for Bank of America in their history. And it was a very simple one-to-one solution. So one of the big things we believe about people centering is that not looking at people will lead to failure. Promise you. So this is a great example. Walmart has been doing some fantastic work around sustainability and greening, and really, it's amazing the stuff they're doing, and the impact they can have by doing it is pretty robust and profound. One of the interesting stories that we'd heard is about about developing a new milk carton, a milk carton that actually allowed for it to be shipped in kind of tighter packaging, so that basically you could ship a lot more, a lot easier, and have fuel efficiencies based on it, packing efficiencies, material efficiencies. What's interesting, though, is that if you can see this carton, and I bet you can see the problem, is that it's impossible to pour from this milk carton. When you pour, it just slops all over. So it's a great example where it's like even designing with the best intentions, you have to think about real behaviors. Interestingly, one of their responses was, well, we'll go out into Walmarts and teach people how to pour milk again, which seems like maybe not a great way to solve for it. But I mean, there's other examples. Segway is another great example. Everyone remembers the hype around Segway. And this is a great example where great product, great idea. But I actually think that some of the kind of missteps on the ways they marketed it actually led to some of the kind of big disasters. Some of the first people who took this on as like the people who were using it were what? Airport police, tourist organizations. These are not groups you look to as aspirational users when you're thinking about buying a new product. You're not being like, whoa, mall cop. So actually not thinking right up front about the behaviors that you're seeing can actually lead to pretty significant disasters. And we know this was a pretty significant marketing disaster. But on the positive side, real insights, real looking at people lead to some really interesting actions. This is one of my favorite stories. It's a guy named Anton Marcus. He was the mayor of Bogota, Colombia. And he no longer is. I think he teaches now. But when he inherited Bogota, there was many, many, many issues that they were grappling with, including water shortage, general city cleanliness. One of the big issues that they actually grappled with was traffic fatalities. It was one of the cities that the populace had the highest per capita traffic fatality of pedestrians who were being injured or killed at crosswalks. And he tried a series of things, including fining people who were jaywalking, fining people who were kind of making illegal turns, things like that, and realized that that actually wasn't getting what he wanted out of it, and they weren't getting the results. And so they sat down as a group. This wasn't a bunch of anthropologists or psychologists. It was just him and his team saying, what do we know about Colombians? What do we know about Bogota? What matters to them? And one of the things that they actually realized up front is that actually paying a fine doesn't really matter. People will pay it or they won't pay it, but it's not the thing that stops them. They were like, well, actually, what Colombians hate is humiliation. They don't like to feel like they're proud. They don't like to feel embarrassed. So he was like, okay, well, let's do this. Let's hire mimes. So that's what they did. They hired 80 mimes, this is one of them, to go stand on street corners in Bogota and humiliate people who basically made traffic mistakes, people who turned the wrong way or jaywalked. This guy's running out into the middle of the street with a big incorrecto sign for somebody. Within months, the fatality rates dropped radically, and it's actually one of the greatest success stories in curbing traffic fatalities in the shortest period of time. This is a real insight about real people applied to a kind of brave action. Another great example is Jamie Oliver. I don't know how many people know him, but he does a thing, a pretty remarkable thing. He started in England. It's come here, called Jamie Oliver's Ministry of Food. I don't think that's what it's called here, but he basically said the biggest issue with childhood obesity is that we don't teach people how to cook. So basically, families, parents who are cooking for their kids don't know how to cook, and that's basically what they teach to their kids. And so it's reliant on processed foods or going out instead, and that's actually what leads to obesity. And so he basically said, we're gonna make education the foundation of thinking about childhood obesity, and created a TV show that was all about teaching families to cook with low-cost ingredients, and things like this, and this is what's really cool, storefronts in towns where you could actually drop in and learn cooking methods, basic things that you could actually do that could actually make it so you could eat healthy food at home. I think just this morning, yesterday, he won the TED Prize, which is basically a Make-A-Wish prize. He gets to kind of think what he wants to do, and what he wants to do is bring this program to the US. The TED Talk is online now. I watched it this morning. Definitely watch it. It's really interesting to kind of see exactly how he's using the same things we're talking about, looking at people, understanding their behaviors, and kind of disseminating that through action in a very active, very public way. And by the way, this guy is making money. It's not like he's like poor. He's not making money off of this. That's where he's giving his money. But he's doing great things with it. Another reason why we want to look at people is, especially if we're thinking about conscious consumption, which I think is one of the kind of subtitles of the talk that I'm supposed to give today, is that some of the things we need to do is make sure that our consumers are participating in the solutions that we have. My favorite example of this is the Prius. Anyone drive a Prius or know a Prius? Or anyone been hit by a Prius? No? Okay, so it's really interesting. So I live in Los Angeles, and I live in this canyon where it's basically all Priuses. So like every morning, there's just like this sound of silence as everybody leaves the canyon. But what's actually really funny is that it's like, I was talking to a friend recently, and she lives in Sausalito, same thing. Like, it's just this entirely silent city as Priuses are silently moving around. And she said that actually one of the big issues right now is that like all these bikers are getting hit by Priuses. And one of the reasons why is actually one of the most brilliant reasons that Prius actually is a great success story, is that one of the things Prius did when they actually built the hybrid concept was that they put a screen in the dashboard that allowed you to see energy and how you're using energy as you were doing it. Stop for a second. They're building a hybrid, is a great kind of fuel-efficient car. They didn't need to do this. There was no reason this had to happen, but doing it made this product, I believe, incredibly successful. This is actually, as you know, there's actually whole groups of people out there who basically try to track their mileage to see how much miles they can actually do, looking at this screen all the time. So there's actually online competitions around it. One of the big issues when you're in California and people are getting hit by Priuses is that people spend so much time looking at this screen that they're actually not looking at the road. So the combination of silence and not looking leads to, we need mimes or something to kind of stop this. But again, very simple action leads to very significant behavior change. And if you think about it, what we're asking there is for the consumer to participate, the consumer to actually do some work. And that's, I think, at the extreme, one of the things that we want to look for when we're looking at how we can design for consumption and careful consumption with people, is recognizing that not everything is consumption. So we talked about Red Cross, or somebody mentioned Red Cross this morning, and a really interesting story around that. When we started working with them, we were working on the blood drives, and they were talking about how people would come in and they would get really bad complaints about how poor the service was at the blood drives. And there'd be all this. And so basically the first question they brought to us was, can you make us a more service-centered business? How can we be more service-minded? Which is a really good question. And the reality is they could be a more human-centered business. They could have been a more human-centered collection process. But stop. And this is actually one of the things we said to them. It's Red Cross. People are donating their blood. It's not a service. In fact, it's work. People who are going through the process, who are bringing blood, they are giving of themselves. It's a donation, and they actually are expending effort. So to compare it to a service, a hotel or a retail context, may not be the right way for us to compare it. And in fact, one of the models that we used was recycling. If you think about it, those of you who spend your Sunday morning sorting through your tins and plastics and papers and take it to the dump, and people do that, that's not a service. That's not like something nice that someone's doing for you. You're doing work, but you like it, or you think about it, and you actually want to do it. And one of the things that we think about is if you can think about designing for behaviors, you can actually get people to engage in the process of the work they have to do to make this a better place. So that whole piece of human centering is kind of talking about the notion of thinking about how we're designing better for the people that we're actually serving, our consumers, and actually bringing them into the story that we take forward. The second piece of human centering that I want to talk about, and one of the things that I think we've been doing a lot more recently in the last 5 years, is recognizing that The biggest impediment to impact for a big business, one of the hardest things to manage as you're kind of trying to get something into the field, is typically the business itself. The organizations we live in are also our biggest obstructions to having things happen. No, I mean, I work a lot with academia. It can be great. It can be pretty slow, right? It's like to kind of get things through. And there's a lot of processes and things that actually happen that make it that way. So one of the things we believe is that if you want to have things happen in the business that you're working in, looking at the organization as a group of people, as a community, helps you make that happen. I just have to drink a little bit of water. Sorry. So this next piece of kind of points I'm going to make are actually about that. Human centering, part 2, focused on how you actually can change an organization to make something happen. Another TED Talk, this is actually one of my favorite examples. A gentleman named Barry Schwartz did a talk last year at TED called The Loss of Wisdom. And he echoed something that we had seen so profoundly in the work that we did that I actually almost always share this story. But he was talking about how, in general, big organizations increasingly become less and less wise. And actually, as you get bigger and bigger, that's the case all the way up to governmental organizations. The bigger you get, the more you forget about the things that actually make you wise. And the example he gave that I thought was so profound, he gave a bunch of examples, was looking at a janitor in a hospital's job sheet, basically what their requirements are to do as a job, and sitting with it and kind of going through all the duties that a janitor in a hospital had to have to do, and that was things like making the bed, mopping the floors, making sure the bathrooms were clean, dusting, all those kinds of general hygiene things, and saying that this is a really profound, thing that we understand that these janitors have to do. But then going out and talking to janitors in hospitals and asking them, of the things that they have to do as a janitor, what's the most important thing? What's the top thing on their list? And across the board, the top thing that came back to them was take care of patients. Their number one thing was to make sure the patient was okay. And then it was mop the floor, clean the bathroom, do things like that. And this is something that I think happens in organizations, is that we forget the reason we joined them in the first place. Many, many of us are in academia, or in business, or in healthcare, or in the government to make change, to do things for other people. That actually, rarely, when you're a 3-year-old, you're sitting around being like, I want to not care about people when I grow up. I want to do a job that doesn't matter. The reality is that is a big driver for us. We forget it, and our organizations help us forget it. I'm going to tell you a story in a little bit about a very, very high-end brand that actually had forgotten it and the massive impact it was having on their business. And here's the other thing. We said this already. Communities are, in fact, our biggest constraints. This is one of my favorite stories. I read it in an HB article, and then I actually wrote about it in something that I'd done. But I can't remember the name of the woman, I think Lisa something, who was at Best Buy and developed the concept of wolf packs. And basically, for those of you who don't know it, wolf packs was a way for women in Best Buy to think about actually marketing to women. And it's actually a pretty profoundly revolutionary idea, and you can read about a lot of it online. But my favorite story about how she developed it is that she was asked by top leadership in the company to think about why Best Buy wasn't coming up with great marketing strategies for women. Why weren't women being addressed as a kind of primary market for this company? And so, great, she went away and sort of thought about it. And as she was doing it, she kind of looked at the organization to see, like, are there reasons why we're not doing this? And one of the things she noticed is that Best Buy was really good about doing in-field research, where they would take all their top leadership out into the field by jet and fly them around the world to see all the interesting things that actually could be inspiration for the future of Best Buy. And when they would come back, they'd always come back with really interesting market strategies for where Best Buy could go. What was interesting to her, the observation that she made, is when those planes would go up and they'd be on this kind of worldwide tour and they'd come down with a new strategy, there were never women on that plane. It was almost all men. It was always men on the plane. So she said, she went back bravely and said, not surprising that your market strategy isn't informed by women. You're going up in planes, sitting on your plane with all men, and there's nobody actually to bring that insight in. So the first rule she made to actually get wolf packs done was the plane never goes up without a woman on the plane. Really interesting, simple thing that actually began to make change. So there are things that are embedded in our organization that actually can make us act ways that we don't want to act, and we have to look for that. And we can use human-centered methodologies to do that. So this is the example that I'm going to give. It's not social impact, but it's actually still a story that sometimes, believe it or not, can make me tear up. But this is a project for Ritz-Carlton. They came to us, the president of the company, and said, we're worried that we're losing market share, and we're worried that we're actually losing relevance in the world of luxury. And we want to think about how we can actually engage with a whole new world of relevance and do it in a way that can be highly competitive. So that what they really wanted was a way to kind of continually update the luxury brand in a way that wouldn't mean that if you're Four Seasons, you could copy them. Four Seasons typically wasn't copying them, but looking someplace else to kind of figure out, like, so people would actually come in and steal their ideas. So they asked us to do that, and we did a thing that we called scenography. We built a concept called scenography with them, and the idea was go out in the field, understand what happened at the resorts, and experience it firsthand. It was really tough work. In fact, our whole team, and I was on it, had to go out and basically we were like out there experiencing all of the luxuries of the Ritz and journal about it continually. Kind of say, what were the best moments? What are the things that were most interesting? What were the things that were coming up that we saw that were really impactful for us as a guest? And then at the end of our stay, we would go and talk to the people on the staff and say, we saw this thing. Can you tell us how it happened? So this is an example. This is an example. This is what they call the defining moment of the day at the Ritz-Carlton Half Moon Bay, where basically all the fires get lit on the bluffs and a bagpiper walks out. And it's just one of those moments where if you've been there, you'll remember it forever. You may not remember the Ritz, but you'll definitely remember that moment. It's a profoundly impactful moment. And so we went out and spent time with the GM and the marketing people, the operations people at Half Moon Bay and said, how'd you do this? Tell us what you did to make this happen. And over time, what we developed was a list of about 30 key moments in any hotel experience that if you could change them would actually make you have a really profound impact on the business, the way the consumer felt about it. And we developed a pretty simple process, this is a piece of it, that allowed you to kind of say, here's how you, on the ground at a hotel, if you were a hotel staff, could make one of these moments happen. So knowing the Ritz, knowing what you have against you, knowing the moments, you yourself could make the moments. And we developed it and we created a thing called scenography. And this is it. In the end result, it was 10 books with these 10 moments that explained how each moment was made. So they were actually real moments that we saw at the Ritz. And then a template, so you could actually figure out how to make your own. So here's where the story gets interesting. I thought that was interesting, but now it gets really interesting. So we took this scenography back to the president of the Ritz, and we shared it with the top people in the company. And we walked them through the strategy, the project, the books, how we learned it, and the president and other people there basically were like, it doesn't work. It's not going to happen. We don't like it. We don't actually think it's good. So that's by the way, that's a really hard meeting to have. We were sort of sitting there being like, okay. And the problem is that we actually believed it was good. We actually believed we had evidence it was good, but they didn't like it. But the worst part was they were like, we don't think it's good. We actually don't think it's going to work, but we've already booked you to speak at our GM's conference next week and share it, so you got to share it anyway. So you can imagine the terror as a consultant. They flew me to Barcelona by myself, which IDEO never goes anywhere by themselves. We always go in packs. But it's like I had to be in a suit. We never wear suits. In front of 180 GMs from across the thing. And they're all European, primarily white, older men. And I present scenography and in terror during the whole thing. And get a standing ovation. And get people coming up afterwards saying, this is the most futuristic thing the Ritz has ever done. Get people in tears. Like literally, I had a GM who came up to me who said, I joined this business because I wanted to use my creativity to make my guests happy. That's why I'm in hospitality. Over time, I've moved entirely towards operationalizing everything I do, and I don't get a chance to be creative. Interestingly, the GMs at that conference, they got together, brought their money together to fund the next phase of the project themselves, which was basically to teach scenography to all the resorts. So basically bringing all the GMs, all the kind of top staff together in the resorts to basically learn scenography so that they themselves could actually teach it to their own resorts. What was amazing is, I'll go back really quickly. We had created this really high-end looking deliverable, this kind of book, because it was, for the GMs themselves. They actually went out, took it to Kinko's, and then printed like thousands so that basically they could be everywhere at the Ritz. So that you could be a housemaid, or you could be a concierge, and you could have one as well and think about how the moments actually could relate. What I love about this story is that if you walk out into any Ritz today and you go to the front desk and you say, can you show me scenography? They will show you scenography. You can ask anyone, and they will show you the moments that they've made at their resort. There's incredible ownership, and it's still there. And what I really love is the president's not still there. So I think it's really interesting. I don't love that. I mean, it's like, and I'm sure he's on to bigger and better things. But the point, though, is we can forget to look at the baseline of where our service is, where the things that we do are delivered, and in so doing, we can pull creativity out of the things that we actually want, that we need, where we need to have them the most. Number 3, I call this evolution is revolution, or kind of taking baby steps to have massive impact. And this actually comes out of a pretty standard design methodology, an IDEO methodology, which is prototyping. We actually don't believe design is sitting in a room and just drawing something and then putting it out in the market. We actually believe prototyping, putting things in the market faster and faster, is actually the way you actually design. That is the way you impact. We'd rather try something sooner and fail sooner than try something way later and have it fail in market. And so that's actually we do everything. When we do hotels, when we do hospitals, we actually build rough prototypes and ran them through. When we were working with Memorial, we did this. We did a bunch of prototypes with hospital staff running through things before anything got built to say, this doesn't work. And we found a ton of stuff that didn't work way quicker and in the long run way cheaper than if they actually had gone forward. So the reality is that we believe prototyping is a way to go forward. And what I want you guys to think about is like, how can you prototype in the work that you do? And I think there's a bunch of different ways to think about it. Prototyping is not always building something full scale. Sometimes it's about putting ideas out there and letting them kind of percolate. So these are 2 examples. So I would say a good conversation in public can actually be a prototype. You can test ideas. This is an example from a project that we're doing with Good, where we're doing a whole thing on business metrics and how to change business metrics for social impact. And it's basically an ongoing dialogue between a bunch of people online that lets people kind of figure out whether or not these ideas will work. It's a simple way to prototype new methods and new methodologies. So you can actually do it in really simple ways. The thing with prototyping is if you really want to have impact and you really want to kind of get scale, more prototypes, more people doing it, more people experimenting is better. So more is more in this case. And the example that I give here is from Kaiser, where we've been working with them for years, and the focus hasn't been to rethink anything. It's been mostly to look on the ground at their nurses and figure out how every nurse can actually prototype and actually share those prototypes back with the whole organization. So what's interesting is if you're a nurse on the floor of a hospital, you got a ton of workarounds. You're working around all the time, and people are always prototyping better solutions. The problem is there's no way to share them. So you have one great solution, but it's your great solution. So the whole point here is to figure out how to kind of create a whole group of prototypers and a method for them to share so that the prototypes can spread quicker and faster. One of the things that I really think is interesting, and I think this is actually pretty connected. Technology's changed everything. The way that we do things now, the internet, the ways that the social networking, the kinds of things that we can actually do has meant that we can actually prototype and engage a lot quicker than typical. And this is actually a really great example. One of the things I'm most interested right now is what I'm calling microsystems prototyping, where people can actually prototype small, fully functional systems really quickly and put them out into the market and test how well they work. And I happened to be at a conference on Tuesday sitting in the room with this guy, and he was talking about what he was doing, and I was like, whoa, this is it. This is microsystems prototyping, and it was the best example. So his name is Jay Parkinson, and if you go online, you'll see what he did. Basically, he was a doctor in Williamsburg, and he was known as like the hip doctor, if you couldn't tell. He was totally like, you know, Williamsburg hipster doctor. And he suddenly realized that one of the things that he hated was just all the kind of red tape between him and his patients. And so he basically built an iPhone app. He put his like website and a Google Calendar online, and he allowed it so that patients could actually directly connect to him, schedule appointments. He would do house calls, and they would pay him in PayPal. So really simple kind of system that he built, and over time he built up about 300 patients in the Brooklyn area. That's a whole system. That's a complete system, and by the way, it sidesteps our entire healthcare system. Yes, it's cash only, but it's like, think about it. There are no exam rooms, there's no other infrastructure, there's no other costs. He could charge less because of the fact that he was kind of coming there, and people were paying directly. But it's like basically whole new system. So what I love about this story, though, is that somebody else was building the platforms with which a system like that could actually work at a broad scale, and built, and basically came to him and said, come to us, work with us, let's build this on a large scale. So together, this group built a thing called Hello Health, which is actually out there now. You should take a look at it. And what's really interesting is it's got two portals when you go on. One's a patient portal. I was just looking at it yesterday because I met him on Tuesday, and I was like trying to learn everything I can. One's a patient portal, which is like, if I'm a patient, here's everything I need, how I can actually see what doctors I have available, what times are available. Then there's the doctor side, which has a lot of the things that doctors have. And I think one of the big things here is engaging both groups to say they both want to sidestep the system. They'd both rather kind of go around it than kind of go through it. And so the system has actually been incredibly popular, is making, you're just seeing it everywhere. The membership rates have gone way, way up really quickly. And like just recently, Fast Company profiled as the future of medicine, him as future doc. Read about it. But what I love about it is the initial system, let's go back to that, was really simple. It was really easy. Any one of you could step out today and build a system like that, I promise you. I could, and I'm really bad at technology. We can do this, and we have the tools now to prototype, and we shouldn't be afraid to think about how we can actually do that. The last key thing I want to talk about is the notion of open innovation, and we've been hearing a lot about this. I have a specific perspective on it that's a little different than just let's open questions out to the world, but let's talk about what open innovation allows us to do. One thing we know is that opening things up to a larger group of people means that in the long run we can potentially have bigger impact. So there's a bunch of ways to think about it. The simplest way to think about opening is making your message clear. And these are just two examples. One is Now. I don't know if anyone knows Now. It was a clothing company that, again, decided they wanted to kind of markedly decrease its carbon footprint. So they had stores, but they actually didn't keep their products in the stores. So basically, if you bought, they kept a small amount, but if you bought and had something shipped to you, which is actually better for the carbon footprint than actually kind of having mass things stored, basically what they would do is they would give you a discount. That discount would go to any fund of your cause. What's really interesting about it is that Now as a model failed. It didn't work. And the main reason was that they actually were giving too much of their money away. I think it was like a lot. It was like 10% up front. So one of the things they did when they failed and had to close their stores and actually shut down for a while is they said they failed. And they told the world that they had failed. They told their consumers because they were giving too much money and that because of the certain kinds of issues that they were having around the ways things were operationalized. And the consumer had a lot more patience. And actually, they still exist today. In fact, they're doing a lot better today because of it, because they had the consumer engaged directly. Another example is, and I don't know exactly how I feel about this, but American Apparel. And I live in LA. I don't know if anyone knows about the Legalize LA campaign. But basically, one of the things that American Apparel, the only thing that American Apparel has said that they really focus on is worker rights and focusing on American-made, making sure that we're legalizing labor that's coming over or at least giving rights to people who are kind of coming over the border. And so when you're in LA, there's this big Legalize LA campaign everywhere. I don't know if it's here. But what's interesting is that when we go out and interview people at American Apparel, like just kids who are shopping at American Apparel, we'll sort of ask them like, well, what does American Apparel stand for? And we usually get two answers. Either workers' rights, which is pretty good if you're a teenager and someone's saying, well, it's something about workers, and sex, that's the other one, but that's in everything, so we would expect that. But it's really interesting like how often those two things come up when you actually spend time talking to people about what American Apparel means. So that's being forward with your message, kind of telling people what you stand for. There's other things, and this is actually, I'm reading this book and I'm fascinated by it. The idea of taking our questions, the biggest questions we have, and making them open. And this is a guy, Dan Buttner, he wrote a book called Blue Zones. And what's really interesting is not so much the book. The book is basically about aging and how we can age well, and it gives 9 principles. But what's interesting is the methodology by which the book was written. The book was written by a thing called what he called quests. These were National Geographic funded quests, where basically what he did is he built a team of researchers, about 10 people. They were anthropologists, doctors, ethnographers, filmmakers, about 10 people, and they chose, like, I think there were 9 regions called blue zones where people were living the longest and living the best. And he gathered together around 500 people on an open kind of platform, educators, again, doctors, a bunch of people who couldn't actually be out in the field, and said, we're gonna fund these quests where we'll go out and we'll research these blue zones. We're gonna get all the information back to you daily so you can see what we've seen. We want you to review them overnight and then come back to us with the questions you want to look at the next day. So literally what he did is he opened the question to a really big group of people who could think constantly about how to make the research better, ask the questions they want to learn, that he could actually feed back out in the field. I think it's a really interesting example of how open innovation can really stretch. So open innovation not just being like, how do we ask big questions and hope we get a lot of ideas, but really, can we get a lot of people thinking about the same problem and guide us as we're solving the problem, not just giving us solutions. Really interesting one that's happening right now with Pepsi. I don't know if anyone's seen the Pepsi Good campaign, but they've taken, I think it's $30 million of money from marketing, places where they actually used to kind of put it into kind of commercials and advertisement and other kinds of event-based marketing, and they've given it to Good Magazine and basically have developed this thing called the Good Challenge, which is a series of grants that basically you get to vote on to figure out what you want to award some of this $30 million to. So in this case, it's basically an open competition, but what's fascinating to me is that it's Pepsi doing it, and using Good as the brand that actually has the authority there, because if Pepsi just did this, frankly, nobody would trust them. But if they take Good Magazine and they're working with them, there's a bigger trust network to actually say this money can actually have real meaning. We did something along these lines that I thought I would share as kind of a last example, which is, and I guess this is the point. When we talk about open innovation and going out in the world and asking questions, one of the things I think we have to think about is, are we ourselves good innovators? Will we come up with better answers than anyone else would if we're kind of put into, if we're asked the question? And you can say, yes, maybe if we're experts, that's the case. But the question that we have at IDEO is, how can we make everybody, everyone in this room, everyone that we talk to, better at innovating, better at solving problems? And so we were asked by Gates, I think somebody in the audience I was talking to is somewhat familiar with this work, but we were asked by Gates about 1.5 years ago to do exactly that. They basically said, we want to have better solutions for rural agriculture and figure out what we can do so that when we're giving money to NGOs who are working in the field, they're coming back to us with better solutions, and they're okay solutions, they're not great. So we created a thing for them, and I'm not going to share a lot about how we shared it, how we created it, but a little bit more about what the effect was, called the Human-Centered Design Toolkit. It was an innovation toolkit that allowed for, that basically you could download if you were an NGO in the field working with agriculture issues, and it would teach you design methodology, how to look at people, how to kind of see insights, figure out what insights actually might apply to what kinds of actions, and then from that kind of create design responses to it. So we created that. It looks somewhat like this. This is actually a hard copy. Most of them actually were digital because people would just download them directly. It went up on our website, it went up on the Gates Foundation website, and it was a place where people could just download it at any point. What's interesting to me is not so much the methodology or how we did it, but actually the effect it had. So immediately we saw people using it. So this was I can't remember the name of the, sorry, it's right there, Vision Spring in India, where basically they downloaded the kit. This is not an agriculture group, so it actually wasn't meant for them. The kit wasn't, but they used the methodology to think about delivering eye care into rural India. They were like, well, we can use this, why not? And really interesting, I just love this story because one of the things they realized as they were out in the field is that when they were looking at kids and kids' eye care, they were trying to figure out, like, well, how can they get kids interested in knowing whether or not their eyes are bad and whether they should be taking care of eye issues? And they were like, well, what if we had kids talking to kids, because kids love playing doctor. So what they did is they trained, that was their insight, they trained a bunch of kids to actually administer the eye exams themselves. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a little girl administering an eye exam to her class. And from that, they were able to spread virally their impact on getting kids to kind of think about eye care and getting kids into glasses, which is what they were primarily focused on. Kids who actually had poor eyesight getting a pair of glasses. And they were able to do it all themselves using the methodology. So that's kind of what we'd hoped it was. It wasn't agriculture, but it was still happening. Then we saw a really interesting thing. We get used to this, but it's like over time, so someone wrote us and they were like, well, we like your methodology, but it didn't totally work for us. So let me tell you what did. And people started sending us kits. They were like, what I did was this, and it was way better than what you did, but it's a build on this. Or I did this and it was better. Or I translated it into Cambodian. So just so you know, it's like so basically we were getting all these people sending us all these iterations on the design methodology, which for us was way cooler than what we'd actually done in the first place, was the fact that people were taking this, adapting it for their own situations. And we just saw this massive peak. So one of the things that we're doing right now is and we started seeing students using it. We actually have people in the government who are using it. People are downloading it for every part of their process. And again, sending us back ideas about how to change it. The problem is that we just can't. Like, there's just no way for us to change it fast enough to make it applicable. So what we have now is a next round of funding from Gates to basically build the social networking platform that allows all those people who are changing the platform, the toolkit, to share the changes with themselves, so they can actually make a better toolkit together rather than relying on us to do it. So I want to go back to the very first thing that we talked about and kind of end on this, which is that I sort of said, I don't think there's an if here around business and social change. I believe business will be better through human centering. I believe that we're going to see social impact. But if we're wondering why, I think there's a few things that we should actually hold and think about. And I thought I'd end on a couple reasons why business will be a good vehicle for social change. And one is that businesses that think about their constituents, the people out in the world, and the real issues they grapple with, in the long run will see better effect. That it actually aligns with, it should align with their business strategies. So this is actually an example. One of our clients, University of Phoenix, and it's fascinating. Biggest educator in the world, highly critiqued for completion. So their students, a lot of their money is actually from government because students use financial aid to actually pay for University of Phoenix classes, and the government says, they better complete, they better actually kind of get their degrees, and when they don't, it actually reflects really badly on University of Phoenix. So they're actually creating now an open innovation platform that's actually focused not on completion, but it's actually focused on college preparedness. It's basically going back to the high school age students and helping to figure out, fund, and think about ways that high school students be better prepared for college and thereby better focused on completion. So the reality is, this may seem altruistic. It's not. They're definitely giving to do it, but it's right in line with their business need, which is that they need to be able to show that they can complete, and they believe the cause is that students should actually be better ready for college. So when we can think about these things, social impact there's an easy case to be made. We see better results. This is Mayo Clinic, and there's a great article, if anyone hasn't read it, in the New York Times by Atul Gurwand, who's their medical reporter, but he was talking about our healthcare system, and we've worked a lot with Mayo, and he uses Mayo as an example, and Mayo's a brilliant example. As a healthcare system, they've basically changed one of the most basic structures of healthcare systems, which is that the doctor's incentive system. So basically, doctors are salaried. They're actually, and they belong to the group. So basically what happens is, because they're all there and they all work together, and if they recommend one kind of treatment or another kind of treatment, or if they pass somebody off to somebody else who's a specialist, they don't get incentivized by that. There's no reason to they don't get more money for it. What's happened is, it's created a far more altruistic group of people who are mostly focused on the patient health. And what's interesting that I learned from the article that I didn't know is that because of that, in fact, their delivery costs are actually way lower than a typical healthcare system. What's interesting for me is when you go, how common the mission is at Mayo. So when we work with them, our teams go through it, but everyone who works with them goes through a 3-day training. And again, back to that question, or the Barry Schwartz example, janitors, doctors, administrators, nurses, they all go through the same training. They're all sitting in a room like this, learning about Mayo together over 3 days. that changes the ways that the culture actually works, and they see better results from it. So another reason. We also believe that there's just new metrics that are coming. So check out the website on Good. We're looking at this all the time. We do believe that happiness is mattering more and more. This is I don't know if this is one of the examples of Rate My Day, where basically people can kind of go online and just say, here's what my day is like, it's good or bad. But we're actually seeing this as kind of a metric that's coming up a lot more for business. And we know actually that it actually matters. You get better results when the people who you work with are happier. This goes back to the Ritz story I told earlier. When people feel like they're engaged and happy, they do better things for their company and see better results. And one of the things that drives that is feeling like they're doing things that are good for people. And then finally, this is the leading edge. I think this is really interesting. In the long run, the reason why I believe this is going to work, the reason why I do believe business will actually think about social impact and make real difference, is actually because of people like you in the room. Your choice. You decide. You think about how you take it forward. But one of the things I've been working on personally right now that I've been loving is with the Aspen Institute Business and Society program. It's actually how I met Caroline. We're building a fellowship that's primarily focused on entrepreneurs, people who are inside big businesses that are trying to kind of innovate to make those businesses better places. So our first class has people from IBM, Walmart, other places that are basically trying to use these kinds of methodologies to push big social platforms through their business. And it's amazing. So what's interesting to me, and the reason why I think it's kind of a leading edge indicator, is we did it last year. We got quite a few fellows, applicants. This year, it's like through the roof, the amount of people who've applied from it and how many kind of companies have come forward saying, we want our people in this fellowship. This is actually where we're going, and I think we should feel pretty good about it. So with that, I leave it to you. Go forth, to quote Levi's now, and make a difference. And I'll open it up to questions for you guys. Cool. Was that really fast? So you have a lot of time for questions, is that right? What time is it? Oh, no, it's good, sorry.
Fred, you mentioned something about TED initially. I'm not sure I fully understand that. You mentioned video, speeches, other things. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, if you don't know, TED is a pretty interesting resource to look at. TED, in fact, I was sitting next to a business student on a plane, and it seemed like that everything they were doing, they were actually learning from TED. But TED is basically, I think it means technology, entertainment, and design. I don't even know exactly what it stands for, but it's a broad form of all kinds of people in the world making change, coming forth with 12 minutes to give a talk on how they're making change. And so what you get are a lot of ideas crystallized in really quick ways, and it's going on right now. Like actually, a lot of people at IDEO are there right this moment. And what happens though is that they get uploaded onto their website almost as fast as they actually kind of come out. So you can see these 12-minute thoughts. So I would really recommend it as a resource if you haven't seen it. Definitely go look at the Jamie Oliver one today if you haven't. The Barry Schwartz one's on there as well. But it's TED.com, and I mean it's a great example. It's really a media and event platform, but actually a lot of their focus now with this TED Make-A-Wish program is about using that to actually make beneficial change in the world. That's why Jamie Oliver just won. Definitely check it out. Oh, you have a mic. You have to use the microphone.
You base your whole career on making large shifts, and so I was wondering, how do you even start to tackle problems personally? What are some of the critical principles that you carry with you every day that you bring to every problem that you're going to tackle?
It's interesting because I think there actually are some really basic ones that I hold on to, and I guess actually, and it's interesting, and I would say I hold this true for myself, and I hold it uniformly for almost any student group, or actually any group that I talk to, which is that I think there's one thing that we have within us that can actually allow us to make change and kind of drive us forward, and it's really simple. It's empathy. But if you think about how often we untrain ourselves away from empathy, we forget to think about why people who are not us might feel the ways they do. I think this is a powerful tool not just from the point of view of designing great things for people. So certainly you understand more about a consumer if you can empathize with that consumer. But it's also a great tool for understanding how to navigate organizations. You can figure out what's going on and why someone might be stopping something in an organization when you can stop for a moment and empathize for what they actually might be feeling within it. So it's a really powerful tool to stop and put yourself in somebody else's shoes for a moment and use it strategically. I don't mean just do it in like a soft way. Use it to think about, well, what does this mean? What can I do to kind of overcome the obstacles that are being placed in front of me? When I'm feeling especially Californian, which since I'm here, I'm feeling really Californian because it's like, it's funny, I was in the hotel last night, someone was like, you're from California, why are you wearing a scarf? And I was like, well, it's still cold here. But I felt really weird for doing it. But it's like, when I feel really Californian, I actually believe that if you're really designing for someone, if you're actually a business thinking about your consumer, you kind of have to love your consumer a little bit. It's kind of weird, but you have to believe in them. You have to actually want to work for them. And I think it's a really funny thing to be here and talking about loving your consumer, but I really think that's one of the biggest things that lets you have empathy to think about what you actually are going to do. But it's a massive skill. It's like, and we should be good at it because we're all people. We should be able to understand each other pretty well. So I guess that's the number one thing. Questions? I think you have to wait for the microphone, so I'll just.
So thanks very much for coming. I guess this might be a follow-on question, but a lot of your work starts with getting great insights into how people behave. And I'm in a class right now where the professor's always telling us we have to stop being autopilots and turn ourselves on into like observers, right? And you just talk about empathy. Are there other ways that we can turn ourselves on so that we can be better observers to help get these insights?
Yeah, it's really funny because I think there's like, and this is actually a classic thing, and it's a thing that comes up a lot when I'm talking in schools, is there's questions like, are there methods, and then are there things that you just practice getting good at? I would actually say that's something that you practice getting good at, but I think there are things that you can actually do. It's funny, I did a whole series of travel books called Eyes Open, one about New York, one about London, that's focusing on basically looking at day-to-day experiences and learning what you can learn about New York. And the reason that we did it, the reason that I wanted to do it is that it feels to me that there are certain moments where you're better at practicing at looking. Travel's one of those things, right? So it's like you actually step outside of your context and you say, wait, this is weird. This is a weird place. Why are they doing this? And you try to puzzle it out. When you can get good at that in travel, it actually can help you when you come back into your daily life to think about, wait, there's weird things that are happening here at the grocery store, not just someplace else. So I think actually looking for places to practice, dumb things, I don't actually know if I have it. No, I don't, because I just put it in my other suitcase. I carry a camera everywhere. Everyone at IDEO carries a camera everywhere. And the reason we do it is because it's actually a physical, heavy-ish reminder that, that we should be looking all the time. There's actually just like really simple, practical things. It's, again, I ask my people to journal because I think just like the moment of quickly reflecting, lots of people actually do it in blogs now. Quickly reflecting, the practice of it means that if you know you're going to try to hit something at the end of the day, you're actually looking for things out in the world. So I think these are all things that are simple things that can actually let you sort of stop and remind yourself that you should be stepping out of your day-to-day practice and thinking about new things. I don't know if that's helpful. Questions? Oh, you're torn between two questions?
Hi, more practical question, I guess. When a new project comes in, how do you bring people on your teams? What does the structure look like?
Well, we are, so IDEO is multidisciplinary, so we're 550 people, but it's designers, storytellers, filmmakers, journalists, anthropologists, psychologists, like all the kind of people that we talked about. Some actually have knowledge around the areas that we're working in, so there were people who've worked a lot in healthcare, people who've worked a lot in education. So what we try to do is, so what it means is that for the vast majority of IDEO is a big open pool of 500 people across the country or across the world that we can say, for this team, we think these kinds of people are the right thing, and kind of source them together. So we'll actually we think we need this kind, we need someone who's really good at technology, we need a writer, we need this, and we pull them together. It's hard. What's hard for us now is that we get more and more problems and questions. And so unless, and because we actually believe that you need to sort of spend some time at IDEO to learn the process, it means we just can't hire in people to be on teams, or we can't just outsource. So what I think we're finding is that it's actually the teaming structure as we stand, which I think is still the right way for us to approach problems, is ultimately putting a cap on our ability to grow, which is interesting. So for one of the things that we've had to kind of grapple with is, are we cool with that? Are we fine with the idea that we're always going to be slightly under scale for where we probably could go based on market demand, based on the fact that we actually don't think we can actually solve the problems appropriately if we don't have the right team? So it's actually, so what's funny, it seems like a practical question. It's actually hit at a really fundamental philosophical question for IDEO, which is like, are we okay always being smaller than we could be? And I guess right now we feel like we are, because I think that's the right way to be. So.
When you're talking about bringing your ideas to a company that has contacted you, it sounds like that you can have a huge culture shift. And how do you ensure that that idea is adopted throughout the organization?
So that's actually, I think in the last 10 years, like the way, one of the ways that our process has evolved is recognizing exactly that we would actually go in, and sometimes there was cultural alignment and sometimes there weren't, but when we stopped and reflected back on the places that we were failing most significantly, it was typically we were failing because we hadn't given enough thought to the organizations that we were actually stepping into. And so all of our projects have now what we call a looking in phase, which is basically just understanding the culture. And that actually typically then allows us to kind of better scope the project. So it allows us to say who's in the room, who has to be in the room to have success, what kinds of change. I mean, the risk example is a great example. Who's going to be pivotal in the change that you're asking for? So that's a great one. We didn't do that for that project. We discovered the way the culture was, and that actually ended up being instrumental in making the change. I think enough of those projects made us realize that we need to be really disciplined about doing that. So we do that. And we have a bunch of new kinds of skill sets, like design for business, which are basically MBAs who come in to think about like looking at the business and understanding how the business works and how we can actually make change happen. So we spend a good piece of that. The other thing I would say is that over time, IDEO has become, from a project-based company, we've gone to a relationship-based company. So we work with the same clients continually. So like, University of Phoenix, I've worked with them for 2 years now. It's like we know them as well as, as if we were there. We go to all the key staff meetings. So we try to live there as much to kind of begin to understand how we can actually make change. And by not live there in the typical consultant way, like be in a room and whatever, but like try to be as embedded in the culture as possible. I don't know if that's a typical consultant. No.
When you guys come up to a problem, naturally you're going to have a lot of solutions to that one problem. How do you choose what your one solution is going to be?
That's a really good question, actually, because that's exactly right. I think the two biggest issues is can we make the leap from the insight to a solution, and then which of the solutions is right? So if there's like 3 or 6 ideas, like how do we do it? And the way we do it is prototype and test. So that's actually why we consider it fundamental to the design process, is that we won't say, okay, this is the right one, let's go forward, without trying to take some version of it out into the field. And that could mean consumer testing, that could mean we did a project for almost anything, where it's basically we'll quickly build a model. So we just did a project for Bank of America that was building a new banking concept, and we built it and ran their people who had to work in it through it, people who had come basically to see what we could learn, and we built it in no time, like using foam core and a couple posters, where you could actually kind of mock it up enough to be like, this is going to work or not work. But that's actually why I say prototyping is key to the design process, because it actually helps you make an informed choice to what you do. It also ensures that you are learning from the places where you're failing, which is a really good thing for us as well. There's another one down here.
I saw a TED video of Sir Ken Robinson, and he was talking about creativity in the school system and how it's being taken out sort of as you go through the school system, and they put more of a focus on mathematics and science, and sort of they tell you to conform, fall in line, and get out of that creativity mindset. So I was wondering if IDEO has done any work early educational school
Yeah.
systems and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we have a whole, it's part of my practice is a group called D4L, Design for Learning, and it focuses on basically K through 12 undergraduate and graduate education. And it's everything from building the schools to building the systems and curriculums. And it's funny, I was actually on Tuesday, I was in New York with Roger Martin, who runs the Rotman School of Business, and a bunch of designers and a bunch of that's where I met this guy, Jay Parkinson, and the topic was exactly that. Like, well, actually the topic was undergraduate design and business degree. So could you design a design and business degree together, which was, that was the topic. But what came up was that actually, interestingly, what they were saying is that people who had the greatest kind of ability to kind of go through the process, you could look to their K through 12 education as actually having been pretty significant. Not surprisingly, Montessori kids, like, certain kinds of educations were actually leading to different kinds of thinkers. So one of the things we stepped back and said, how can we affect this? Like, how can we affect the K through 12 at a more massive scale? And it's funny, I'm actually giving a lecture next week to, it's basically it's the National Independent School League headmasters. So I'm like, that's definitely going to be the topic that's going to be on my plate, because I think it's actually really essential. It's key. And I think the last thing, it's like, again, it goes back to what we're taught versus what we embody. It's like, what do we act like? And a lot of these things are more like, how do we act as a culture, not actually things that we were specifically taught in class. So I mean, the gentleman who was talking about, your professor saying, step out of your day-to-day life. It's like, it's a hard thing to teach, but it's an interesting thing to think about how you could embody it in the culture, here or anywhere else.
You started to touch on this before, but I'm wondering if you can give us any examples of problems that IDEO has been unable to solve or proactively was unwilling to take on, and why?
Yeah. So we we don't take on problems with mean people. I know that sounds really weird, but actually, I mean, it's like, but it actually makes a big difference. I mean, working with people that we like actually kind of goes a long way, and that doesn't mean that we're just like, we don't get to know people before, but that's a big thing. But there's quite a few, and some of it's about reframing the problem. So I'll give you an example. We're doing a lot of work in government right now, interesting. Like, I think government and healthcare have a lot of interesting parallels. I actually think healthcare is way ahead of government in their ability to innovate. But I think that's saying a lot. I mean, government's actually incredibly slow, incredibly bureaucratic. And so getting things through the system takes a long time. And so what actually we've had to do to kind of grapple with that, kind of understanding, feeling like we're not making big enough change, is actually recognize that in some cultures and some problems, improvement is innovation. Having things get better is innovation. And that's actually some of the things that you can only things you can hope for, I think. So that's been one of the lenses. And then there's just things we failed at. Like, there's been, and I mean, honestly, there's countless projects where they've gone out and they haven't quite, I mean, there's so many that I can't actually always think about them. The big thing for us is actually like learning from them, figuring out why they failed, and kind of making everybody understand why they failed so we can actually learn from that. I don't know if, do I get to choose people or do you choose? Oh, okay.
You made a couple references to times when you were in a situation and you identified an auxiliary problem or identified something outside the scope of the work you were doing.
Yeah.
Do you ever find yourselves or your colleagues find yourselves identifying the problem, a global problem, and then trying to find somebody to sponsor it?
Yeah, so we actually, yes, absolutely. And there's a couple processes that we've actually built around it. So one of the things that we do now is a session called, what is it? It's like, we do all the research where we basically are looking in and then we're looking out, and we'll stop and we'll actually do a thing, it's like a what have we seen research snapshot. And so what it is that when we present our research, typically, we present it with a solution in place. So we actually don't believe research just by itself gets you very far. So we're typically in a place where we like to say, here's what we've seen, here's the things that we think you should do around it, because often research just kind of leaves you in this floaty place. The one place we're willing to go floaty is in this kind of what have we seen section, where we basically will say, here it is. And it's like, and what we do is we prep our clients to the fact that it will most likely be the hardest meeting that they have, because we're going to share everything we've seen, good and bad. We're going to share things that we don't have solutions with, and we're going to share things that we've seen that are peripheral to the problem. And it's actually really interesting. It's ended up being a really interesting strategy, because what happens is you get all these things that are peripheral, and someone's like, you're right, we have to fix that. And so it actually either becomes part of the scope, or it becomes another project, or it's something that they actually work on their own. And that's, it's a scary meeting to be in, I have to say. I mean, like, we always do it when we prepare our clients before we start the work. We always say this will be by far the hardest meeting you'll go into for all of us. And it's a good one to have a lot of drinks afterwards and, you know, kind of figure out that we all like each other. So yeah, we do. And then there's plenty of times where, you know, the problem, you know, it's like that the problem can't be solved, or the problem can't, it won't be solved. Interestingly, one of the things we're being asked for now is just to do work that's figuring out why things won't go through organizations. So one of my favorite examples, and I can't say the client, is that we had a client who basically came to us and said, help us figure out why we can't get good ideas through the system. And it became pretty clear that it was everyone at the VP level up to the CEO was what was stopping it. Basically, these were people who had gotten so afraid of change and so kind of wanting to own their silo that they would just kill stuff left and right. And we were like, great, well, how do we share that when it was like the CEO and all the VP people asking why it was? So what we did, I just loved it. This team did this, and I thought it was so brilliant, is that they figured out all the behaviors that were happening in meetings, sub-meetings, all the things that were happening, and they got a bunch of kids, IDEO kids, like people who were like whatever, and they had them dress like the VPs and CEO and act it out on a video. So basically there was a video of kids doing the behavior. So there'd be like a meeting, and like there'd be a kid dressed like the CEO being like, I hate your idea because I'm insecure, or whatever those things would be. And it was great. I mean, it was great because like basically you couldn't help but laugh. It's kids. You could distance yourself and you could be like, whoa, I totally recognize that behavior. I mean, so we're always looking for new ways and new methods to deliver hard problems. That was risky. I wouldn't do that in every case, but it actually worked. So it's interesting.
Hi. I have been studying models to design different products, and I have seen that the top thing that most of the models want to do is maximize profit from different standpoints. In your approach, in IDEO approach, you put first your customer. Will you said that when you put first people, then maximizing profit will be a byproduct of that? So the most important thing will be to listen to the people?
I would definitely say that that's been the perspective that we've held for the last 30 years. What we're actually finding now is that you can actually still take that, and it kind of goes like the topic I was talking about, human centering with organizations. You can apply the same looking at people for other ways to maximize profit. So actually, when you make, I'll give you an example. We've worked with Marriott now for years and years and years and years, and it's been focused on getting them more innovative in their product design and what they're actually delivering and being more consumer-centered. Simultaneously with that, though, what we've noticed is as we've kind of been going through the innovation process with them, they've gotten faster, way faster to market. And it's really interesting, and they will say it's a direct kind of byproduct of like working alongside us and kind of getting those methodologies in place. So we actually do apply this in other ways to think about how you can actually become a faster company. I mean, that's actually one of the more common questions we're getting now is like, it's like, forget, you know, we can get good ideas, but how do we get good ideas to market fast enough to actually have the kind of impact we have? So we actually think it's applicable to a bunch of different pieces of business as we look at the world.
Hi, thanks again for coming here and talking with us.
So does this feel like it applies? I just want to know, because I came and I was just like, oh my God, it feels like it applies, right? Yeah, okay, well, no one answered, so I'll walk away thinking you did. Anyway, go on.
Anyway.
You're like, I don't want to answer that one. So.
One of the most interesting parts about your presentation that I found was that one company that actually, they had to stop working, they had to stop doing, it was the clothes retailer that they gave so much money away because they were being so socially responsible. And it alludes to the fact that there's such this dynamic, deepened relationship between business sustainability and social responsibility.
Yep.
And my question to you is this: how do you advise business owners on how to prioritize between social responsibility and business sustainability?
That's actually why, and that's why the University of Phoenix example is the best one that I can think of here, is that it's like, we advise that it makes sense when those things feel like they're actually aligned in the focus of the company. So when the strategic benefit to them, the fiscal benefit to them, is actually aligned actually also with the place of social responsibility. What's sort of interesting about that is that what we're seeing now is a bunch of businesses that are opening only on the line that basically what they're doing is providing green products. And so that actually starts to set up a really interesting kind of question for us. And like now is a great example of that. There's Method and a bunch of other product design companies or product companies where that's actually kind of the core piece of it. But what where it's easiest and most clear cut typically is when you can actually work with a company where you can say, clearly if you make high school students' lives better, you're going to actually make your consumer better in the long run. Like, it's like, those are the kinds of places that we actually tend to advise more. And, you know, to be honest, actually, it's really the only place that we see it work. Like, we've actually gone in, what I will say about social responsibility is that it's still relegated at present to corporate social responsibility. Like, that's actually still where people kind of think about it as a siloed place. And so we kind of try to Trojan horse it, for lack of a better word, like kind of sneak it in. Into kind of things that we're doing that are actually more about kind of day-to-day business effect. I think that's changing. So I think that the stuff that we're seeing with the Aspen Institute, the Business and Society program, those are indications that we're seeing a change, but it's still kind of slow there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, whenever you're working with new companies, especially clients that are unfamiliar with your work, how do you establish your relationships with them and let them know that you're somebody that they can trust?
It's actually really interesting because trust is the biggest thing. You know, I said before that we actually try not to work with mean people. We actually ourselves also try to not be mean, and we hire for that. It's like, so I mean, like, it's like, again, we have to have people who are kind of optimistic and open. One of the things that we actually grapple with, and one of the things that I'm actually really trying to kind of think about as we go forward, especially working with government and other places, is how often our language structures don't let us have trust for each other. So it's like, so if you're a business person or business consultant, you have a language that actually may or may not speak to your client. Or if you're a design consultant, you have a language that may or may not speak to your client. Same thing in healthcare. You know, it's like healthcare has a way of speaking to itself that's different than the way they talk to their patients. What we're trying to do and work on more specifically now is sit with our clients up front and get through all the language barriers so that basically we all feel like we're talking normal, which actually allows everybody to like each other and get along a lot better. And so there's actually really simple things like that that actually can kind of get you a step forward. And you think about how much of our world, for good reason, is jargon-based because it actually allows us to kind of go quickly to an idea, but when we're trying to communicate one-to-one, makes it quite difficult. So we're trying as hard as we can to weed out the stuff that's in our work, which is hard, as you've seen, to kind of pull out the stuff that's our jargon, but make it so it's actually clear and plain speaking.
We may have time for one more.
You got the microphone?
Yeah, thank you for coming. It was a fascinating topic. When you've described your teams, you've discussed ethnographers, psychologists, designers, yet you're speaking at a school of business. And I don't hear some of the business skills. Could you speak to the difference in skill set and why you're using this team in advising premier businesses?
Yeah. Well, that's actually really interesting. So, so one thing that we do have this thing called Design for Business, which is it's a pretty big discipline at IDEO. That's actually it is business students who basically come from a business background and think the way or can apply their thinking to our kinds of problems. So, and they're actually not like consultants in IDEO. Like, they're not like the suit wearers. They're actually like IDEO people. So again, finding the right people is actually can take a and it's been one of the most fundamental things that's like unlocked a bunch of the kind of things I've been talking about in this last 10 years is having that kind of resident skill set inside. The ability to say, well, wait, do we really understand the business? Do we really understand what matters? And so that's actually helped quite a bit. But to the whole point before about interrupting or kind of stopping your day-to-day life and kind of figuring out, you know, how I can look again, a lot of our clients are also asking for something pretty new or pretty different. So what they're looking for are actually different skill sets. So we're a little bit privileged or a little lucky there because it's not like they're coming to us with all the kind of same problems they might ask a typical consultant. And it's not uncommon that we will find ourselves working alongside a McKinsey or a Booz or someone else who's actually kind of living in the more traditional business consultancy world and working on the same projects but from different kind of vantage points. So, cool.
Fred, on behalf of the faculty and students.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
In addition to your wardrobe. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, guys. Thank you.